Going here. I want to introduce Justin Hall. He's one of our organizers, and he's going to be talking to you guys about response-ready infrastructure. So, everybody sit back and enjoy.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hello. Everybody hear me all right? Good? Recording good? All's well? Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to B-Sides. We're very happy to have you. Hopefully, y'all are enjoying the day and the venue and this wonderful Cincinnati weather and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, it's been really exciting so far, and I've been excited to kind of give this talk for a little bit. I work for CBTS, Cincinnati Bell. I've been there for a while, been a consultant for companies large and small, did a few years at GE with some of this crew. If you care about SANS certs, I've got some SANS certs. I've done some SANS teaching. I might reference some SANS stuff a little bit here and there in this talk, so that might do something for you, might not. We'll see. I'm going to tell you a story. In 2013, we had a guy come join CBTS as a vice president and start a new security team. And when he did, I went to go work for him. And the first thing he told me was, Justin, I want you to build me a network from scratch. And I hadn't been a sysadmin or a network admin since, like the early 2000s. And technology had changed quite a bit since then. I was like, all right, cool. What do you do? And everything's all virtual, and I didn't know anything about any of it. It was wonderful. There was like new Cisco switches that I'm like, what does this thing do? I'm used to this old Catalyst, like this ancient. I was way out of my league. What he told me was, I want you to build me a network like the classified network I had at my old company, so that we can store all of the intellectual property and the code that we create and all the products. And also, I want my guys to work in it. Like, you want your people to work in a classified network. Do you know what a classified network looks like, how it operates, how it's restricted? Yeah, we'll find a way for them to work in it. And we kind of went back and forth a little bit on requirements. Ultimately, we decided that this network was to be purpose-built to be resilient to attack, because the types of adversaries that we were going to be investigating and uncovering things about that would target us, we knew they would target us. We would need to be able to be resilient to those types of attacks, those tactics that they use. And so it was a very interesting challenge. And I want you to sit back and think, if you were asked to build a network, and I'm talking it was greenfield. It was, literally there was nothing there. There was an empty spot in a data center. Fill that spot in the data center with gear and stuff and make it a network and make it do this thing. And, at some point you're going to have 30 or 40 people operating inside this network. And it's going to host services and stuff for customers and blah, blah, blah. So think about how you would approach that challenge. What's the first set of steps you would take? What are the things that you would start buying? What type of technology would you go research? Who would you go research it from? What vendors would you look at? What are the core things that you need to have? Start those wheels turning. I approached this because I'm a security consultant, and I've been a security consultant a long time, and so we use standards, right? We always point back to the standards. We say the standards are the thing. They say, NIST says, and, SANS says, and ISO says, and PCI says, so I'm going to go do what they say, right? So I considered some of these cool, standards and thought, what do they say about how a secure network needs to operate? And I went and got some lists of controls and said, okay, some of this stuff I can use commercial off-the-shelf products. Some of this stuff I can use open source. Some of it I have to use a mix, or I have to get some guys to build some stuff, some of the devs that we had. And ultimately, I have to kind of cobble these things together into a working network. This is what I expected it was going to look like. Right? Because I'm building from scratch. Right? It's got to be super easy. We'll have a bulk of the controls in place day one. Users move in and start using it. And then the few kind of obscure things like app whitelisting or red team pen testing and SSL decryption and wireless IDS, all the like super fringe tools. We'll get those in like 6 months. It'll be gravy, right? LOL. What actually happened? Day one, we had a bunch of really strong security controls like backups. Yeah, we went extreme. That's the control everybody has, right? Like, that's the one thing you can hold up and say, here's a security control I've always had, backups, when you talk to customers. It's great. We had two-factor. We had heavy network segmentation. We had some good perimeter defenses. We had malware defenses. We had a vulnerability scanning and management program. You can bake a lot of that stuff in pretty easily. And then if you ask anybody that worked in that network, you'll know that day one, all of that my precious segmentation that kept these users from those users and all of them from being able to talk to the core servers and get out to the internet, everybody came over to my cube on day one. Hey, I can't get to the dev's GitHub server. Why do you need to get to that? Well, because that's where all this stuff is, and I need it for my code. All right, open up firewall hole. Hey, I can't get to virus total from my sandboxing lab. Yeah, okay, all right. And it went on like that to the point where I'm like, how did this firewall exception list get to be 300 lines long? I just got really loud, too. The voice of, yeah. So, yeah, it ended up being, I had a few things in place. But it was going to take really long to managing the network and actually build the new tools in and kind of catch up to where I should be. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we're just have to get you that down the road. We don't have time or resources or whatever. The other interesting thing about this is, again, I'm a security consultant. Most of what I do is vulnerability assessment, pen testing. And so as I'm building this thing, I'm realizing that I'm thinking kind of constantly about the ways that an attacker would circumvent these controls that I put in place. I put in two-factor authentication, and I think, how would the attacker get past this? Or, I have my network segmentation, but if they wanted to get from this VLAN to that VLAN, what's open? What could they write across? I start thinking about what's useful here and what's not. And ultimately, I kind of had to choose focuses. I had to pick and choose, what am I going to focus my time on? What do I need to decide? How do I decide what's useful or not? What's worthy of I have X amount of time to implement a control, to, operationalize it, to make it work with all the other things. What are the things that I should pour my energy into, that's kind of most worthy? We're probably all, we've heard it 7 or 8 times a day probably, under the, we're all in agreement that proactive defenses don't always work. Harlan stood up here earlier and said, prevention fails. Prevention doesn't work. I don't agree with that 100% because I think there are some things prevention can stop, and fewer attacks are better, or worse, fewer attacks are better than more attacks. Fewer pieces of malware in my environment are better than more. I think we can agree on that too. But I also am totally fine with the assume you will be breached perspective, and I think it makes sense. You can slow some attackers down. You can stop some opportunistic attackers. Ultimately, the adversaries that I was charged with defending against, you're not going to stop. If they want in, they're going to get in. So this changes the way that you deploy these controls. And you stop designing your network around preventing attacks, and you start designing it around visibility and monitoring and rapid detection turning into rapid response. And so, again, ultimately where we are all, the end goal, and as I talk about this to my customers, we can all agree on the end goal, even if the means and the tools that we use and the attitudes we carry into it from our experiences change. The one thing we can agree with is we don't want to be there. Universal truth. Nobody wants this. And so, again, I'm going to ask you to stop and think and ask yourself, are you ready? Would you consider yourself prepared to deal with that? Or to to avoid that. Statistically, very few organizations are. Say what you will about Ponemon, their study has some interesting stuff in it, and I loved the statistic. It actually kind of made me feel a little good. Because 62, I think that number is a little soft. I think it's probably closer to 70, maybe even getting to 80, but I don't know. It's not 100. Like, there are a lot of organizations that feel confident in their ability to detect and to respond to an intrusion. But not many are watching, they're all totally aware that they're not watching their environment fully to determine if they have been breached. And I don't think that that's acceptable, given the threat landscape, given today, and, years and years and years of public, breaches, and more of them happening every year. When interesting data is so easy to steal, and attackers are so common, and the tools and the techniques that they use are so easy to acquire and to learn. But again, what I found out, actually, I guess I've been, again, as a consultant, it's awesome as a consultant. It's so great. I don't have any responsibility. I can show up at your door and tell you everything you're doing wrong, and then I get to leave. And I don't have to do anything else. I can just be like, here's my report. Later on. Have fun with all that, It's fantastic. Now, when I get a lot of our customers that I have done, year after year assessments with, it's fun because I get to watch them grow. It's like watching my kids grow up. And I've learned to appreciate the things that I tell someone to do. It's hard to implement. How many of you guys have done a vulnerability scan in the last year? Of your own stuff, at home or at work? All right. Throw out some of the top findings that your vulnerability scanner has found. That you're like, just anything. Anybody willing to admit? SSL vulns, yes. Yes. I have written so many bloody reports that are like, you really need to fix your invalid certificates. All your certificates that are throwing errors when customers, and in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't really care nobody cares about this. This is not the thing that's gonna get you breached, right? But again, so yeah, I'm so used to telling customers, here are the things that you need to care about. Here's the things you have to absolutely go fix. All of them I've discovered in this process of building this network, they were all very, very hard. I have been thinking kind of lately about how other industries handle this problem. My dad was an industrial systems engineer. He built machines that go on assembly lines, and he designed the machines themselves. He designed the code that ran them. He basically, like in the process of creating the SCADA industry, set me up really to have a job for the next 40 years. And it was very nice of him. I don't know if it was intentional, but he used to show me the machines. He was, man, we got this Windows 95 box in here, and it's on the internet. It's fine. It just gets really easy to, connect to remotely with this VNC service I have set up. But what I learned kind of thinking about, how did they do it? They have, his industry has a standards body, the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, and they have a standard that describes safety instrumented systems. They have a set of baseline processes and controls and a bunch of substandards that have been written that are specific to certain industries like nuclear and industrial and whatever, that describe a set of baseline technical controls that you put in place to detect and prevent catastrophic problems. And everybody does it. Everybody. You go into any, shop floor, manufacturing plant in America and probably all around the world, and you will see this same set of controls in place. Because they know, okay, well, there's this hazardous material, and if there's a leak, we better find a way to detect that leak. Because if it leaks, people are going to die, and I'm going to go to jail. So I should find a way. And everybody has universally accepted these standards and implemented them. Now, most of these standards were written in the late 90s, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. That's just when they all sort of figured out, oh, we should probably build something like this. But they did, and everybody does it, and it's crazy. And I was talking to him about it, and he's like, yeah, we always put that in place. It is foundational in what we do. And I don't think our industry can say that, and I think that's a little sad and scary. Now, granted, the IT industry has existed as it, in its current state, just a couple of decades, much, much, much younger than you would see in, industrial manufacturing. But every computing environment in the world is not designed to detect anomalous activity. We don't have a standard like that. We have some standards that tell you technical controls, but hell, go read NIST 800-53. There are 177 mandated controls in there. Even if you go to SANS CSC, there's 20 categories, and 20 is a little easier to swallow, but they all have sub-things that they require. So the 20 turns into 177 eventually. So, again, what I've been thinking about is what should our standard be? What are the baseline things that we need to have in place? And mine is not anywhere close to a standard, but I have an idea, a list that I've been talking about with folks in the industry. And we at CBTS have been calling it a response-ready infrastructure, an infrastructure that is, my boss, Mike, coined this term 5 or 6 years ago, and we've been sort of spitting out what we think it might look like ever since. Again, if we are going to come up with a baseline set of controls or processes that we absolutely have to have, technical stuff that we bake in, understanding that we're going to eventually get breached. Understanding that we need to have something in place to prepare for that breach. How can we as an industry kind of move towards this set of standards? So before I dig into that, I want to kind of give us a problem to solve, so we're all kind of on the same page. Little snort alert here. You see this show up? Again, we've talked. You've heard, John and Coleman both kind of talk about network-based alerts and how to handle them and the triage and analysis process. And I want you to think again. You see this alert show up on your, in your IDS. What do you do? Take yourself in your head through your steps. What are what's the first thing that you go check out? And I'm going to point to Mitch down here and call him out. Mitch is a fine event analyst. Mitch, what's the first thing you do with this alert?
Validate the SIG, check for maliciousness, who the hell is that IP?
Yeah. All fantastic answers, yeah. Sure, yeah. Look at the PCAP. Yeah. Okay. Now that is, of course, what Tony would do. Cleveland. What are the tools, what data sources, what people, what processes do you have to have in place to take those actions? Because it's a given that you can go grab a PCAP from somebody, but hope to God you got that PCAP and it's, it hasn't been wiped off the sensor's disk or it's not corrupted. And those are small technical problems of one piece of one type of investigation. So again, I want to talk a little bit broadly about this. I've always seen incident responses about answering questions, right? Who owns this system? Where does it physically exist? What kind of important data is on that system? Who is entering and leaving my network perimeter? Another question, like what did the user click on that link? Do I know that they clicked on the link in the phishing email? Do I know they opened the attachment? What systems on my network have this registry key or have this file in the file system? Which of those are talking to this IP address at this minute? Yeah, that type of thing. I'm not sure. The makeup of this room, you're going to have a lot of analysts. You're going to have a lot of security staff. You may have some management. If you're management, you and your team should be able to answer those kinds of questions. And if you aren't sure if you can, I think that's a problem. Because that is the responsibility of a security organization, in my opinion. I'm going to talk about a couple of non-technical things real quick before we jump into the meat of this. You need people, I think, obviously. if you're a small organization, again, I've worked with small ones and big ones. If you're a small one, you probably don't have dedicated security staff, and all of us up here talk like everybody has 20 people on their team, and if they don't, they're stupid. That just isn't realistic in a lot of cases. You're a 100-man shop, and CBTS deals with, we're very regional, we deal with a lot of small 100-man shops. They're all like, we have an IT guy. We don't have a security guy. Okay, well, your sysadmin's your IT guy, and they're actually pretty qualified for that in a couple of ways. You ultimately need a handful, and I've done some talks on this in the past, and those talks are up on my website. You need these roles at a baseline minimum to do incident response, in my opinion. You need somebody that's in charge of the investigation. You need your incident handler. You need someone who is actually doing the analysis work, taking in the data, making decisions. That loop that John talked about a little bit earlier, ingest data, analyze, get output, take that data, figure out, oh, what do I need to do with this thing I just outputted? Okay, take that back into the analysis process, lather, rinse, repeat. That's the job of the analyst, and a lot of the oversight of that is the handler. And then you have to have decision makers in the organization that take what the handler tells you and does something with it. Does that make sense? Good? Okay. Again, incident response processes are very good. You should have one. You should have something written down at a minimum that tells you who gets to declare an incident, under what conditions, who calls the shots until someone says, okay, we are done. Your process should probably contain some stuff about, whose responsibility is it to conduct each piece of the investigation, to make those decisions. What questions should you have answered, and then how do you answer them, and who gets to answer them, and those types of things. But again, we're not really covering that type of stuff. I want to talk about technical controls and defenses to have in place. And I have 8. I had 7 at one point, and then the last time I gave this talk, somebody suggested another one that was a fantastic idea that I had totally forgotten, so I added an 8th one. And we're going to use the NIST 800-61 Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. Again, if you want to know, what's my incident response process? What should it look like? How do I go through this? NIST published this fantastic guide that is totally free and has a lot of great information, and I'll have a link to it at the end. So these are the phases of an investigation. You may have heard something similar. Maybe you grew up in DCAR, detect, contain, analyze, remediate. Maybe you grew up in SANS, and so yours is preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, lessons learned, whatever. They're all basically saying the same type of thing in a couple, 4 or 5, 6 blocks. So we'll start out looking at these couple of phases: preparation and detection and analysis. Obviously, you need logs. Harlan earlier was kind of talking about everybody, the first thing is you're going to get asked for, you're when your incident handler walks in the door, or your managed security service walks in the door, and you've said we have an intrusion, and you say, okay, show me the logs. And his story about we're gathering workstation logs, but it's one event ID, made me chuckle and broke my heart at the same time, and I kind of went back in the booth and cried on the soundboard for a little bit. Oh, it's so that type of thing. Again, I think. How many folks, be bold and raise your hand, you feel like your organization is doing the right amount of logging? Yeah, there are people in here that work for very large, very, very, successful security organizations that have some of the best talent and staff in the world, and they did not raise their hands. And that's because most of us don't know what we are logging, why we're logging what we are logging, what we're missing. And it's just really hard to catch up, I think. But again, that's got to be a big focus, I think. What do you log? How many? Again, as a consultant that works a lot with customers that do not have big, expensive, formal security programs, I get asked, "What do you log? What logs should we collect?" Here is my answer. Anything with a host in it. Any log that contains any information about a host on your network. Host name, IP address, whatever. Log it. I don't care where it's from. I don't care if it's, the secretary's workstation just requested something, an IP address by DHCP. Log it. Or this internal display system has requests the same host name via DNS 5,000 times a minute. Log it. Maybe do some aggregation or something there, but log it. Anything with a user, and this is not just hosting in your network. You know, my machine goes out, hits a proxy server, and requests a URL from the internet. That URL is a host. Log it. Anything with a user account. Your user account, a customer's user account, outside user's user account. If it contains a user account, log it. Under any circumstances. Anything involving a critical process. If, you know, here's my box that's running my sort of key application, my web server that drives all my business. I want to know everything that happens to that web server process. That, you know, IIS.exe or whatever. Anything that happens to that process, any interaction with it, anytime it stops, starts, memory is injected into it, something happens to the file on the file system, I want to know everything about it. Anything involving sensitive data. If I have credit_cards.xls on my file system, I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it, people. I've seen passwords.xls. I've seen passwords.txt. If passwords.txt is on, you know, C users, my mom, documents, I audit the crap out of that file. I turn object access auditing on for that file, and I look for it. I look for, you know, passwords.txt passed in plain text in the URL, or in SMB or whatever. All of that stuff gets logged because that is what you are going to search for when you are performing your investigation. That is what you pivot off of. You start with a user account, a file name, and a host, and you say, tell me everything about that in the last 24 hours. Oh, this is interesting. Here's another IP address. I need to move off of that and pivot. That's what pivoting is, and that's why you collect that data. All right. You get it all into one place. You make it searchable. You make it accessible to the people who need access to it. You know, that's Splunk, that's Elk Stack, that might be a bigger SIM that you've got. Again, you're trying to answer questions here. What did X host do on my network in the last Y time period? What did X user do on my network in the last Y time period? That type of thing. Because a lot of times you might not have, you know, bulletproof data that's beginning your investigation. Maybe you have a kind of a garbage IDS alert that is the beginning of your investigation, and you don't really have a good way to confirm it. And so you're doing those types of broader queries. Not every investigation is this slick, I'm Sherlock Holmes and I answered, you know. All right, item 2 is indicators, the things that drive your detection. I can't do a whole lot better than Coleman just did talking about it, so I'm not going to try. Just, you know, I don't know who it was that asked the question. I think it might have been Reeves, asked the question about stale indicators and, you know, what to do with older data. Managing that data is incredibly important. And again, if you were, you know, out taking a leak when Coleman was talking, go back and watch the video. You know, he has a lot of very interesting things to say. Again, you have network-based indicators. You want to manage those. And your host-based indicators, I think a lot of people, it's funny, in our organization, I was talking to Harlan as he was leaving, and I feel like our region, we have a lot of people who care and are very smart about network stuff. And Harlan's kind of a host-based guy, as he kind of said in his talk. And it made me realize that I think maybe we favor that side. We're all ESG buffs and, you know, NSM buffs, and we love sitting on the network, but there is a lot to be gleaned from the endpoint, but it can be a little scary at times because people don't let us touch the endpoints or put agents on them. And it's hard to go query them, and it's hard to control them. It's really hard to control endpoints. It's hard to control a big, big, big group of endpoints. So, we have a guy on our staff that's doing some research around endpoint systems and host-based IDS, and actually Nate's sitting right there. Nate's on our team, and you know, we were talking about a project that he's working on, and talking a little bit about OSSec, the open source host-based IDS, IPS. That is a fantastic tool. That is one that I really regret I haven't spent more time learning and playing with, because the stuff that I could do with that, given time and the knowledge, there's just, yeah. So that, again, if you don't have $1 billion to spend on, a giant endpoint auditing tool, you can go that route. There are open source tools out there. I'd love to talk to you about it more when I have longer than an hour. Asset inventory. How many people have asked the question, who owns that system, and have not been able to get a good answer before? Yeah. A good asset inventory, again, extremely challenging to implement, but super valuable. And I just don't think it gets. I'm working with a Fortune 500 customer right now, and sitting down with their security team and saying, "Tell me about your asset database. Tell me about your asset inventory. What do you use?" Well, we've got 4 or 5 of them. The network team uses this one. The server team uses this one, and the biggest one, actually, that most people use is the one the help desk has, but we don't have access to that, do we? No, we don't. And those are that's totally commonplace. That happens all the time, right? So, again, this is something that's got to be foundational if you're building from the ground up or you're looking for a place to focus. Focus on an asset inventory. Get a good one. You should be able to answer. This is not just IP address or host name or physical location, maybe user that's owner. Collecting great deals of data like, again, this is kind of a pipe dream, but who's the last user that logged onto that system and when did that happen? Imagine being able to grab that out of your asset inventory. How cool would that be? There are commercial and open source tools that can help you with that. So you may use like a CMDB, but you also may just go run port scans of your network every day and collect what hosts are out there and what services do they have open. That's a pretty good list to have. So again, if you have nothing or you don't trust the data that you have, think about how useful that would be in an investigation. You also probably want to know if that system is running code that it should be or shouldn't be. Again, Harlan talked a little bit earlier about app whitelisting, and I think that it's a valuable tool. He asked the question, how do you know, who maintains the list of what's authorized to run and what isn't? I think it's hard, but I think it's a good goal to strive for, to be able to say, this is my list of authorized software. Now, if I have 50,000 people or 100,000 people in my organization, it's going to be a big, complicated list. Does that mean you shouldn't try it? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. Okay. Your analysis tools and analysis environment. What I have found is that you build out sort of ahead of time what you think you're going to use, and then when you begin an investigation, you sort of scramble to collect or install the tools that you realize, oh shoot, I really need those and I don't have them in place. I remember before, again, my last gig, we were using Macs and using those as an analysis environment. And the first time you would fire up, Wireshark just became a native application in OS 10, but the first time that you fired it up, when it was ran out of X11 and it was a X11 based application, it would take half an hour on a really powerful system to boot up. And so some of our guys would be like, all right, I just got this PCAP. I'm new analyst. I got a new machine here. I'm going to fire up Wireshark and I'm going to look at this PCAP. And Wireshark would just sit there and render a font cache or something like that for half an hour. And you're like, I really need to look at this right now because there's a customer who's waiting to hear from me. And so the point is, you have your tools assembled ahead of time. You've tested them. You've made sure they work. You have this, and maybe, again, small shop, maybe your tools are on a laptop. If you're a big shop, and you've heard some people kind of talk today about these sort of large, complex, automated apparatuses I don't know what that word, that can take in vast amounts of data and process it automatically and spit out small pieces of data that are super actionable. Whichever one of those you have in place, again, you want to make sure that you have operational tools and they work as expected ahead of time. So you want that stuff prepared long before you need it. And that you have you're at the right places with your stuff, with your detection capability. You have your host-based stuff on the right hosts. You have your network-based stuff on the right pipe. And one of my favorite stories about this is when we were, I was working for a customer years back, and we were deploying network detection technologies at every site. And this was a customer that had a whole lot of sites all around the world. So many so that many of the cities had overlapping names. And so I was charged with delivering and deploying a network detection solution to a site in Melbourne. I was told Melbourne. Network guy said, send this to Melbourne. The site in Melbourne. Okay, cool. Where is that? All right, so I start digging around and, company intranet, try to find an address, and I find Melbourne, Australia. Okay, yeah, that's Melbourne. They call it Melbourne or something like that down there, something weird. Cool, that's where we're going to send it. So I got the address. I shipped the device down there. It was super expensive to ship a box to Melbourne, but whatever, I did it. It gets down there. And I get a call like a day or two later from like the doc manager. What do I do with this thing? Oh, here, give it to your local IT guy, and I've got some instructions for him or whatever. Local IT calls me like a few hours later. What do I do with this now? Where do I put this? Your perimeter, your site, network connection comes in, internet connection comes into router. Router goes to this goes to internal switch, that type firewall, whatever. Okay. Well, why do you want this? Well, you have you're a very important site and whatever. You have like 5 people here. Turns out Melbourne, Florida was actually where the IDS was supposed to go. And no questions asked, I could have left it there and it would have been fine. Nobody would have said like, Justin, why did you send that to the other continent? But yeah, so again, we've learned that we need to make sure we've identified what are the critical network connections to monitor and are we monitoring them. Data center links. It's very difficult when you have a big, large, complex network, but it's worth the effort to try to map that stuff out and understand what are the important connections. Where's my user internet traffic going? Where's traffic going to key servers or key applications, that type of thing. Similarly, you need to make sure that you have the privileges in place to get to the data that you need. Because your team may not be running all of the tools that you are going to be using during your investigation. You may be relying on sysadmins to collect data for you or get you access to applications that can give you data. You have a network team, and that network team owns your VPN servers. And you're like, well, I need to be able to get my VPN servers to see those logs and see who's logging into the VPN. And I don't have that data. And there's a breach going on, and the guy that can give it to me is in Aruba or something right now. You don't want to make that scramble. All right. So up to now, we've been talking a lot about visibility, how to see things, how to understand what's going on in your environment. And so if you can do that, I think you're in better shape than most organizations. Cool. All right. The next stages that I want to talk about, containment, eradication, recovery. What do you do after you've figured out everything there is to figure out about your attacker and what they've done and what they're after? Access controls. How do I stop someone from doing something on my network? On the network, on an endpoint system, with a user account, with a piece of data, how do I put blocks in place when I need to put blocks in place? Is that my responsibility? Is that some other team in my organization? Again, you may work in an organization that's very reactive about this type of thing. That as soon as they detect the attacker, they want to block them immediately. Many of you have learned the hard way that that's sometimes a bad call, because the attacker will just be right back in, but they'll be coming from a different address. So, but there is a time and a place, I think, to establish, to kick the attacker out. But that is different based on what industry you're in, legal ramifications, shareholders, who's in charge, what they've taken, what the attacker's doing. It is not there is no simple answer to this, and anybody who says so is trying to get you to buy their book. So, again, this is a good, but again, process stuff, forget it. Technical controls. What access controls do you have access to? Can you stop stuff at a proxy? Can you put in firewall rules or router ACLs? Can you stop stuff on an endpoint? That's even better. Can you do both? Yeah. Talked about network, talked about endpoint. have a gold image. Okay, I'll ask it. How many people in here, your organization does not have a gold image for workstations or servers? All right. That's okay. That's all right. I guess it's 2015. Yes, it's commonplace. It's easier now with like VM templates for servers. That's been a godsend for a lot of organizations. But that's something that you can get to. But being able to reimage back to a known good state, no matter what, has been fantastic. I think a good turnaround for a lot of organizations, not just from a security perspective, really from IT operations too. So you want to have your gold image in place. All right. Communications. 2 more items here. Communication. Do you have a way to communicate with your incident response team, with your security team, with your operations and network folks? It sounds, you always feel like you're talking about spycraft when you're like, the attackers will monitor your communications. They will. Some of them will. So you want to have a way to communicate with your incident response team that's out of band. So, that might be just start up a Slack instance or, Skype or GChat or something like that isn't going to hopefully be intercepted and used by the attackers. And again, set that up ahead of time. You want that in place before, so you can jump on it kind of as needed. Incident tracking. Do you have a way to document the intrusions that you are investigating and learn from them? There is a wealth of information to be had from your incident handlers, your event analysts, the people that are doing your investigations. Not just the things that they are confirming, but the things that they are discarding. Again, John talked earlier about the value of false positives and what we can learn about them. And tracking that data in a system, having a human sit and write, the steps of their investigation, the processes they took, is valuable not just from a technical perspective, but really for your organization to learn where are inefficiencies. If I've seen that, it's really hard to get this certain piece of data out of this team or this, process or application, maybe someone can look at that stuff later and try to improve that. You have to make sure that your investigators are documenting properly and filling in all of the right information, and being thorough in their write-ups. And I'm gonna pick on Mitch again a little bit here. We were doing training of our analysts at one point, and I was bringing up I'm gonna look at this ticket that was, responded to by superstar analyst Mitch Gonthier, and I was like, I know he's a super sharp guy, very, very thorough in his investigation process. He's going to have fantastic write-up on everything he did, and I brought it up, and it was 2 characters. It was a B and a 9 for benign, because it was a false positive. And I was so proud that day so you want to make sure that you have thorough write-ups. Mitch has done fantastic thorough write-ups for everything else he's ever done, I promise. And I bring this up because I wrote a white paper recently on incident tracking after I realized that after I tried to implement a couple of incident tracking systems and help design one, I realized I don't know as much as I should about this very crucial part of the incident response process. So I went and did some research and wrote this paper, and so I've got some stuff in there. Ultimately, what it says, TLDR, is that there are a lot of tools that you can use for incident tracking, and it doesn't have to be, one, there are very few, if any, there's really only 1 or 2 that I found, commercial tools that actually do this, that are purpose-built for it. Everybody else is cooking it up with RT, RTIR, or with some kind of issue tracking or bug tracking system, or with a wiki, or with their own help desk software. And ultimately, if it serves the purpose, great. It'd be nice to have a custom designed one that is only for incident response, but if you don't have that and you have something else, use what you have. The point is you want to document the details of the investigation. You want to make fields easily searchable. You want tags. You want to be able to trace the path of an investigation through your team and see where your inefficiencies are. You want to see who are your superstar analysts, who are the ones that are just, moving quickly through things that are useless and paying tons of attention to things that are useful. Who is thorough in their analysis, who is doing good research. Anyway, there's some details in that paper if you want to check it out. Test your stuff. If you've been sitting here going, okay, got that, yep, got access controls, yeah, all right, yeah, asset database is not great, but it's pretty good. I think I've got enough. Yeah, we've got logs. Go test it when you get home, please. Just make sure. Just make sure. Even if it's been like a couple of weeks since you looked in the asset inventory or since you tried to log on to your perimeter firewall and see, do I actually have the ability to put a rule in place? Or do I actually have the phone number of the guy who I should call, or did he get fired a couple months ago and I just don't know? Make sure you have, and do those checks a couple of times a year. It feels a little crazy and redundant, like you're being super, paranoid. It's worth it. It's worth it to make sure that when someone is breathing down your neck to get answers about an investigation, you have the capability to do what you expect to do. So now, let's go back to this alert, and once again, think about all the things that you need to have in place to investigate that alert. To answer all the questions that you will have about this particular alert, and then figure out, what are you missing? Are there things that I've mentioned that you might be missing? Again, I am a consultant. This was not done on CBTS's dime, but it's something we do is talk to our customers about how to build this stuff out. So I can help you with it, and you can pay me, or I can help you with it. You can not pay me, whatever. If you're interested in talking about it later on, that's fine. Love to. Here are the 3 different controls that I mentioned too, or control sort of standards. I love BsidesCincy. I think it's fantastic. I think it's one of the most useful documents that's been produced in our industry in a really long time, because it's really easy to come to an event like this, and I love this event, and I love listening to really smart people talk all day about security, and that's what I get to do here. When I go out and consult, what I find is in this room, we are miles and miles ahead of your average customer, your average company, and your average company needs real guidance on how to do security in a way that is meaningful. And one of the things that I found is that BsidesCincy really helps with that. They can say, what do I put in place? Not what do I buy, but what do I put in place in some way, shape, or form? And I can point to this and say, this is a good way to do it. And then, NIST 853, which is an expanded version of that goes into great granular detail about controls. And 800-61, which is the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, another really good resource. Go read it and then read in bed, so when you fall asleep reading it, you can sleep on your pillow, because it's not riveting reading. But it's good stuff. So, okay, it's 3:50. I got a few minutes for questions if anybody has any. All right. Gravy. Well, thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of the night.